One. Hey guys, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Community Conversations with Councilwoman Tameika Isaac Devine. I am Councilwoman Tameika Isaac Devine, and I'm excited to have you guys here for this really, really important conversation. I've been wanting to have this for a while, but I've been doing a whole lot, coronavirus, everything else, and so I'm now kind of back to getting the things that are really important to me out here. And so I'm excited to have this. For those of you who are just now joining me, this is your first time. Community Conversations is an idea that I had actually in light of coronavirus. As a councilwoman, I'm usually out in the community doing different things. I have town halls, I go to community meetings. And when everything started shutting up, we were unable to really do the things that we used to do. And so everybody was home. And I just started going live and then realized that there were so many conversations and topics that we still needed to have, although we were having it remotely, they were still important. So this is an opportunity for me to have some real deep dive, as much of a deep dive as you can have in an hour conversation with people about topics and issues that I think we all need to be more knowledgeable about and figure out kind of what our role is in making our world better. And I'll tell you, it started with kind of coronavirus, doing some things about health disparities and other things, but it's transformed. We've done a lot of different topics. And so if you want to see some of the other ones, you can always go back on my Facebook page or YouTube. But the thread that always comes through all these is I want you to be challenged as you listen to our conversation, not just to educate yourself, because that's really important. So I want that, but also on what role can you play in making things better? And I think that that's really timely now when we think about what's going on in our world, in our country, about, particularly inequities in society, and especially when it comes to racial inequity. And as we talk about a lot of the things that we're talking about now, the underlying thread to a lot of the issues in our communities, whether it is poverty and homelessness or lack of affordable housing or health disparities or barriers to reentry for formerly incarcerated people, there is always kind of that underlying tone of inequities, particularly racial inequities. And so I think that this topic is timely, and I'm really excited to have someone that I've gotten to know over the last couple of years and admire greatly, and so proud of all the work that he has done. And he'll share that with you in a few minutes. But I'm excited that my guest tonight is Lester Young, who is the statewide organizer for Just Leadership USA, the South Carolina chapter, but also the executive director of Path to Redemption. And we'll talk about that as well. But welcome, Lester. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for the invite. And I really appreciate you for this invite, and hopefully that we can be able to give your audience something that they can really understand, leave away from this conversation with a better understanding of what the barriers are for those who are formerly incarcerated, but most importantly, what redemption really is. About for those who enter into a prison system and return home from prison to live that life of redemption after. So I'm looking forward to jumping into this conversation.
Well, I'm so excited to be here. So can we start, just for those people who don't know you? I think you have a really powerful story. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to start there so people can understand the lens in which you come to this work. And so this isn't just, something that you're like, I see this as a problem, but I'm actually jumping in, but it's actually a problem that you've experienced. So just share with us and your story, and then we'll go from there.
Cool. This is the work that I do when it's coming around. I mean, when it's addressing the barriers of formerly incarcerated people, it's something I deal with personally. At 19 years old, I was sentenced to life in prison for taking another human being over a drug dispute that I had at 19 years old. And I was sentenced to life. And during that time of my incarceration, there was a lot of things that took place that really put me in a place now where I'm able to see different and approach life differently. But for the first 2 years of my incarceration, I was filled with a lot of despair, hopelessness, depression, didn't understand why. I mean, I understood that everything happened for a reason, but then I had to deal with the fact that I took a human being life. And that is something that I knew I wasn't raised up to. You know, my father didn't raise me to be a murderer. My father didn't raise me to be a drug dealer. I come from a 2-parent home, but it was something that took place that I needed to better understand, that what put me in a position to say I want to be a drug dealer, what put me in a position to have a dispute over drugs and felt like the drugs meant more than another human being's life, you know. And those are the things that I had to battle with for the first couple of years of my incarceration, not the battling with the guilt and the grief of taking another human being's life, but then I had to deal with the fact that I was still processing the death of my own mother. My mother died when I was 16 years old. I never processed that pain of losing her at 16. So a lot of the decisions that I made after her death was really about me not processing that grief. So here it is, I'm sitting inside of a prison cell with a life sentence that had maybe a 3% chance of ever being free again. And then on top of all of that, I have to deal with the personal guilt that I took a human being life, that my poor choices, my immaturity caused someone else to no longer be on this earth, and then their family have to live with that. So that was really a personal thing that I had to struggle with. And I remember like one night, not to just be too winded, but I remember one night that God placed in my heart to pray. And I remember I began praying one night in my prison cell. And in this process of praying, my victim came, his spirit came to me, you know. And this is where I tell people, for the first 3 years of my prison sentence, I never wanted to acknowledge this individual. I never wanted to even mention his name because it was too hard for me. But this night, God sat me in this cell and didn't worry about my roommate hearing me cry. I was not concerned about nothing, but only thing I was concerned about was how could I make amends for the decision which I made. And this is that night where the guy named is Gary. His spirit came in my prison cell, and this is where we begin this conversation about me personally apologizing to his spirit for the decision that I made and the pain that I caused his family, that his family still live with that void that their loved one is no longer on this earth. So once I was able to release that and make amends with that, I remember in the closing of my prayer and speaking to his spirit, I said, Gary, I would promise you, as long as I have life in my body, I will live my life as a different person, a life of redemption and atonement and reconciliation. And I will honor your death by doing the right thing. And this is what put me on this journey inside of prison. So when people see me today, they think that this is something that just happened. I've been doing this for 18 years of my I did 22 years, but for the last 18 years of my incarceration, I've been focused on honoring my victim by doing the right thing and being a voice and being an example.
Wow. But think about it. You went into prison at 19. So you were still a baby yourself, really. I mean, when we think about, you know, quote, 18, you're an adult. Well, you know, we send you out there. But seriously, at 18, 19, you're still young. So you were still a kid when you went into prison. Mm-hmm. Tell me, you know, what types of things. So you said even 18 years while still being incarcerated, this was part of your mission. What are some of the things that you were doing inside? And, you know, there was a lot of conversation, I think, as we talk about, you know, right now there's a lot of focus on law enforcement in that part of the criminal justice system. But I think if we're really going to do something, we need to address the entire criminal justice system to include, you know, incarceration. And do you feel like, number one, I want to know some of the things that you did while you were inside, but also, do you feel like our prison system is set up as an opportunity for people to be redeemed, or does it make people harder for when they come out?
I would say this, Tameika. I went to prison at 19, and I was told by the administrators, because I had a violent crime and I had 20 years to do, that they didn't want to make the investment in me. They didn't see the need in making an investment in a 19-year-old person who was given life in prison. So it was like, basically, you committed this crime, Mr. Young. You do not disturb the prison population or mess with my staff members, and you just sit down for the next 20 years, and you might survive prison. You might get out of prison one day. Like I said, I had a 3% chance meaning because it was a violent crime. People in South Carolina don't make parole after 22 years. You know, it's like 30, 40 years. That's just another issue that I have with the parole board. But this is what I had to deal with. I had to deal with the fact that I was told to just sit back and be quiet and process however you know how to survive in prison. But it was through my faith. My father always taught me. I remember sitting in prison and my father would always tell me Psalms 23 and Psalms 54, 55 and 54. Those are things that my father would come on visit and tell me to read every day. And I remember that I knew that the only way I was going to save myself inside of that system, I had to do something different. Remind you, I was reading at a 7th grade level of education when I went to prison. You know, that's a whole nother issue when you're dealing with individuals inside of the criminal justice system. Education is a big barrier for them. So I was forced by my mentor, prison chaplains, and one of my best friends, a couple of my best friends, was forced to sit down and begin reading. And that's when I began that process of personal development and watching shows like an Oprah Winfrey show. I remember watching Oprah and she mentioned the power of journaling. I'm sitting in prison, literally full of despair, like I wanted to give up on prison and life, really. And Oprah said on her show, write down 5 things that you're grateful for in the morning, 5 things you're grateful at night. And I remember getting up leaving my prison cell and going to the canteen, like I need to test this theory, right? And I began writing, started journaling. It was in 1994. I began journaling my personal thoughts and feelings and started trying to figure out like what got me here. And that's when I began that journey. And once I figured that out, I started teaching others. I'm like, man, we have to like find a way to inspire each other, because if not, we're going to die in prison. And I would look at men who were given a life sentence at my age and it was already in at 10 years ahead of me. And I would look at them and I would see these men broken. I would see these men have been beat down by the system, have given up on life. They're not even mentally there no more. And I knew that that was not who I was intended to be. And through prayer and reading and that journaling, I thank Oprah Winfrey right now to this very day for her sharing that story. God placed me in the right time to watch her talk about journaling. And that journal became my counselor, my therapy, my best friend, my confidant. I started sharing my emotions in there. And that's when I began that journey of rehabilitation personally for myself.
Wow. That is really powerful. So let's switch a little bit, and thank you guys for watching, and we appreciate all the comments. Please share this broadcast so that more people can hear Lester's powerful story. And of course, I'm going to share it on all my media. So tell us, after 22 years, what was, I guess, the parole process? I mean, was it good behavior? I mean, how did you get out? And then can you share with us some of the challenges that you experienced when you came out?
I would first say God and preparation. You know, I realized the power of a vision statement for your life, Tameika. You know, I realized that in order for me to ever make parole, I saw men who had given up. God blessed me to create a vision statement for my life, and I live by that. And I envision myself every day in my journals that I'm going to be free. My first time I went up for parole, they denied me. My second time I went up, I made parole. And it was based upon me staying out of trouble. Of course, I didn't get in really no trouble inside of prison. I was just that person that you would see walking across a prison yard with an arm full of books. I didn't care about nothing else. Books was the only thing that I was concerned about, because I knew that that was the best investment I could have put into myself to not be like the men that I saw had already been broken and their lives been robbed. The spirit of them had been robbed out of them. So I knew that that was not going to be me. And just by visioning, I used to sit down in my cell, Tameika, and vision me talking before the parole board, right? And I'm going to tell you something. The day I made parole, I used to envision it with my eyes closed. I went into this room, and the monitor on the parole board was blank. They said they could not physically see me. And I was like, God, you definitely answer my prayers, because to show you that as a man thinketh, so is he. So I envisioned that's how I used to speak to the parole board with my eyes closed. So when I went in and they told me that the screens didn't work, that I knew I was going home, because I envisioned, I believed in it. And I began to speak to them about who I am now versus the crime and the decisions that I made at 19 years old. And by the grace of God, God touched their hearts, and I was released. I was released after serving 22 years. Most people don't make parole after that amount of time. But again, just showing you the power of investing in you, investing in building you, and begin to help empower other people with the message, and the power of, you can never underestimate the power of vision. I saw this. So when I went in, the screen was black. I told my father, I said, I'm going home today. And he was like, yeah, all right, son. But it's just that, because when you envision something for so long, it happens. So I was granted parole by the grace of God, and just because of my character, and people spoke up for me at the parole board. But it was just, I still believe it was just that personal work that I did. And I was committed, and God had a purpose for my life, and prison was no longer the place to hold this purpose. God allowed me to sharpen the gift and the skill to now be able to share this message on a broader level. So that's the reason why I believe I was granted parole.
Wow. Wow. So I remember when you and I first met. So you shared, you were telling me about how your process being, reentry it was. And, you brought up things I honestly had never thought of. So can you share with the folks who are listening, like, what are some of the challenges? You served 22 years in prison. You are, you're granted parole. You come out, society has, says that their expectations are for you to, become a upstanding citizen and a contributing part of society. But I don't know if we really provide that kind of support for you. But tell us, what were some of your personal challenges in coming back into society?
The personal challenge, I walked out of prison at 41 years old with a yellow legal envelope with prison ID, a social security card, and some prison certificates that really had no meaning in the outside world. And there was no, again, remember, I sat for 22 years where I had no counseling, no one helping me understand the world had completely changed. Only ones that helped me was my prison chaplain, and a few prison mentors used to come into the prison system. So when I walked home, I dealt with a major culture shock. I dealt with a culture shock when I left prison. When I left the community, the society, they were beepers. There was no such thing as a cell phone. And I've been so disconnected that when I walked into Popeyes, I remember going into Popeyes to order something. I got so overwhelmed with the menu, because even though I ordered off of a menu prior to prison, but here it is, this was a new thing to me. Everything was touch screen. I didn't know how to touch a computer. And it became so overwhelming for me that I immediately just went into an anxiety and panic attack, because I was so afraid. I was comfortable inside of prison. No one prepared me for what life was going to be like with touch screens, everything like self-serving lines. I remember going to the soda machine in Popeyes, and I had to push these buttons, and I'm standing there asking, and I'm like in a literally just like tensed up, because I didn't know how to even get a soda out of the machine, because no one told me that it was touchscreen. And this lady at the counter, she looked at me, she said, "Sir, are you okay?" I said, "No, ma'am, I'm not." And she said, "What's wrong?" I said, "I don't know how to use this machine." And it took a lot of pride in for me to even say that. And now I look at a lot of men and women who, when they come home, that pride prevents them from asking, and they go back to what they know. They go back to that thing which they know, because it's so intimidating for them. And another big challenge for me was employment. As you know, I'm a strong advocate for ban the box. One of my biggest challenges was getting a job. Like, I knew I had parole fees. I had all of these things that I needed to stop paying. I had to start my life over again. But there was nothing in place, Tameika, to help me make this transition as smooth as I can. Meaning, from now I understand the value of counseling, that I believe that a man or woman, when they're released from prison, they should immediately go into some form of counseling to help them process the stress level of being returned back into the community, into the workforce. So I had to process that. Having job skills, 22 years, job skills are completely different than I was at 19 years old. So I had to learn these things. And as I said, they were very intimidating for me, and people rejected me. People literally like, "Yo, we don't want you who have a violent offense. You are a criminal. We're not giving you a job." And I went on many jobs for interviews, and they would always tell me no. But the thing, going back again, to because I put the work inside of while I was incarcerated, I was able to persevere through it, and that's the thing that allowed me to move forward. And I just believe that, from my experience, I believe that re-entry the prison system need to help building people while they're in prison instead of waiting for them to be rehabilitated when they walk out of prison, because there's too much coming at you when you're just walking out of prison. But I believe that how I was able to survive all of those barriers, because I did the work while I was in prison, that gave me that mental fortitude and forbearance and resilience to be able to press through a lot of no's, a lot of rejections, a lot of, we don't hire your kind, you have a violent crime, you've been convicted of murder, we're not hiring you at all. You know, for me working on a job paying me $50 a day, working 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, bringing home $250 when I have to pay all these fines and fees. But because I had a felony conviction, I had to humble myself until I was able to get myself in a better position.
Mm-hmm. And I remember one of the things you told me about kind of the Popeyes incident was also, I think the anxiety was and the overwhelm was also because you had a choice. And, you know, before you didn't have those choices because you were told, you know, when to get up, when to go to bed, what to eat. And so, you know, I think that's something that people don't think about. And I think people take for granted that we do have those choices. And when people are transitioning from a place where you don't have as many choices, that can be psychologically very stressful for you.
Exactly.
The other thing I think that most people are surprised, and so I want you to go back over this because I think most people probably are surprised. You know, I think we are told, especially by elected officials and other folks, that prison is a place to help people, you know, and so, you know, people can get your GED, or you could do this. And I think people have a misconception that there is a lot done in prison to help. So can you share with us that? Because I mean, basically hearing from you, there was even when knowing that you were eligible for parole, there was nothing that they were doing to help prepare you to come back into society.
It isn't. Like you remember now, just mindful that in 1994, we are familiar with the Omnibus Crime Bill. It was signed in 1994 under the Clinton administration, where it removed the Pell Grants and removed a lot of vocational trades and a lot of programs outside of the prison system. So I came in that period where all of these things that they once had rehabilitation, they immediately took them out. And then the mindset for elected officials and all of those who were connected to the criminal justice system was lock them up, throw away the key. That has been the mentality. So all of the programs were script. So a violent offender go in there with a life sentence. A violent offender don't become eligible for a program until his last 2 years before he's eligible for parole or he's maxing out. So for me, it took me 18 years. I had to, all of the damage, if I didn't really prepare myself, there was 18 years of damage, right, taking place, not really preparing yourself. And then the last 2 years, you got to try and get yourself together. That's not possible, Tameika, because prison damage you, right? So most people assume that, oh, you go to prison, you get these things. There may be some, but they're for nonviolent offenders. This is why I've been advocating, even doing when the presidential candidates were coming through South Carolina, I advocated like not only just about nonviolent offenders, but you have to think about those who have been classified as violent offenders. They're being denied access to all of these educational programs. So they're told, sit inside this prison and you just do what you need to do to survive. And we're going to provide another class of people who are nonviolent offenders according to the statute of law. They're nonviolent. We're going to provide education for them while the violent offenders sit there and they do nothing. So you got people just sitting in prison idle all over this country. They're just sitting idle because of the policies that are in place when it comes down to rehabilitation and educating those inside of the prison system. So one of the things that I've done last year and to this day, we advocate for Pell Grant restoration for all people, because one say, well, I don't want to do it for violent offenders. But I said, I was a violent offender. I was a violent offender. And I'm telling you, the power of education, the power of helping someone understand their personality, understand their psychological makeup, how that can change a violent offender into a person that now become an advocate, traveling across this country, advocating for better education inside of prison. So yes, it is something that most people don't understand. After 1994 to this day, prison have been stripped of any rehabilitation program. Now you have like different organizations, religious communities go in and they do their best through volunteering, creating programs, but there's really no statewide programs inside of the systems across this country that is really focusing on rehabilitating from the day a person walk into the Department of Correction to his or her last day outside of the prison system.
Wow. Wow. So tell us, so since you've been out,
Mhm.
you've done a lot of work in this area, not just educating, but like you mentioned, advocating.
Yeah.
Tell us about Path to Redemption. What is
Path,
Path to Redemption?
Path of Redemption is my baby. And show you again the power on how God positions us. Inside of prison, God gave me this vision about Path of Redemption. And I wrote this plan out. I wrote the curriculum of Path of Redemption inside of prison. It's really about helping those who are inside of that system, those who are incarcerated, to better understand who they are and be able to connect them to a purpose and a gift. Because I think that I know that that was the thing that changed my life, is that when God showed me that I had the gift to speak, right? And I tell people that for a long time I lost my voice. And how did I lose my voice? I gave my voice to my peers. My peers, I gave my voice to them. And what I mean by that is that I just allowed them to influence me. You know how we are when we're young, we allow our peers to influence. I gave them my voice, Tameika, for a long time. I know I didn't speak for Lester. I spoke for a group. I did what others thought or wanted me to do. I never had ownership of my own voice. So here it is, I'm sitting in prison. I reclaim my voice. I reclaim my life. And that's what Path to Redemption was about, helping men in prison reclaim their voice, their authentic voice, reclaim their lives. And how do you do that? Is what I came up with, the 5 stages of incarceration. First, in order for you to reclaim your voice, you have to understand what are the core issues that led to your criminal thinking, led to your criminality, led to your incarceration, led to anger, led to entitlement. And once you understand those 3 areas, you begin to reclaim your voice. And that's what Path to Redemption is about, helping people reclaim their voice, but on the outside, helping them walk in their voice, walk in their truth, be true to who they are, be connected to a purpose. That when people were telling me no, I was cool with it, because I knew that my purpose is not to work in a restaurant all my life. That was just a step that God was testing me to prepare me for the mission ahead of time. Like all of the prophets of God, they were tested when they had a vision. God tested them, right? So that's how I saw my life. So that's basically what Path to Redemption is empowering people to reclaim their authentic voice and reclaim their lives back while they're incarcerated and after incarceration.
Wow, that's so powerful. So tell us, how are you doing that, and how can people support kind of what you're doing?
Well, one of the things I have, like my book here, the 5 Stages of Incarceration.
I have it.
Yeah, my book, The 5 Stages of Incarceration. This is my kite to the men and women in prison, as well as others, to help them understand what that journey looked like. You know what I'm saying? Is to help you understand what it takes to be at that level where you need to be in your life. So I teach, I put this in a curriculum form for the guys in prison, but on the outside, I've started a coaching session where I know the power of coaching and mentoring. So I do group sessions, individual coaching, to help individuals unlock their potential, help them create these winning effects, help them develop these interpersonal skills that in prison you don't develop, before prison you didn't develop, and help them understand their personality trait so that they can move forward and be productive in their lives.
Beverly says, "You sure you're not called to preach?" Beverly, you never know. You never know.
I'm gonna be. I told you I'm gonna run for city council. That's my next passion. Preaching may be somewhere down the line.
So I've gotta ask this, because of, in light of the conversation that we are all having in this country right now. And again, like I mentioned before, I mean, I think when you talk about reconstructing law enforcement, we really need to think bigger. The whole system, the criminal justice system, from law enforcement to the prosecutors and the PDs, the judicial system, in the incarceration system, and the system that allows people to be successful as they re-enter, so that they don't go back to prison. Because we do know, based on the statistics, a lot of folks do, there is a high recidivism rate. And the reason that is, I believe, is because is the supports that you talk about are not there. So like you mentioned before, people, they revert back to what they know. Yeah. So understanding it's a bigger system. There's a lot. And then there's the part you mentioned before, even the part of education and investment in our kids before they get to the point where they start getting into making not wise decisions, because they're still kids. So anyway, so there's a big system. Of course, there's a lot of pieces that we can address, But I think certainly undergirding through all of that is systemic racism.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So, so tell us about kind of what is your view that the role the systemic racism plays in the criminal justice system, but particularly the way our incarceration system, and the way that offenders are treated in and out of prison.
Well, Tameika, it saddens my heart when I think about it. When you're young and you find yourself in the criminal justice system, you're so ignorant about the whole system. But when you become awakened and you understand what the criminal justice system, understand the origin of the prison system to this day, it has always been based on racism. Prison was at the beginning where it says slavery. Prison was called by slavery by another name, is one of the books that I suggest you read. Is that after slavery, they created a prison system where they knew that they needed people to continue to labor and slave for them. So prisons were created for that sole purpose, to provide free labor, what they call convict leasing. We have convict leasing today. You have people in Los Angeles working in the fire department out in forest fires, and they could never, when they leave prison, they could never work for that fire department. You have people right here in Columbia that may be working on the side of the road picking up litter. They could never work in certain cities, and now being that we all pass ban the box, right? So racism and prison, they go hand in hand. We know the history of it. And then we move from there to the 70s to the 80s with the crack epidemic, when Black people were punished more under the Nixon, the Reagan administration, the Clinton administration than any other race of people. You had the disparity of crack cocaine and cocaine. They demonized crack cocaine because it was a Black man drug, so they say. And we were sent off the prison in large numbers, to the point where they created new laws just to punish Black people who were accused of drugs. And some of them were just drug addicts. And you had the disparity of cocaine, which is what crack is made out of, is from cocaine. You were having white counterparts who were getting less time with a kilo of cocaine. They're getting less than 2 years. A person get caught with $10 worth of crack cocaine, that's sentenced to 20 years. So now you have a prison population exploding with Black and brown people during the crack epidemic era. To this day, people are still in that system because of that. And then you had the federal sentence guidelines that were created, where now they charge you with a conspiracy. 10, 20 people can be on an indictment, and these 10 people never sold drugs ever. But because the word of someone else who was trying to get their sentence reduced, guess what? This person lied, and now everyone's incarcerated for the next 20 or 30 years because of nothing. And then we look at the death penalty. Another Steve, what's the guy name who wrote the book Just Mercy? I can't remember. Brian Stevenson. He highlighted the racism in the criminal justice system when it came down to the death penalty. People were placed on death row because they were Black people who didn't have the money, because some white person said that they saw him and it wasn't even him, but because he was poor, he didn't have the education. These people are housed inside these systems to this day as a result of that. So when we look at the population, 2.3 million people that are incarcerated, majority of them are Black and brown people, we have to deal with the systemic racism that are tied to some of these laws that are now placing so many Black and brown people, where they've now created gang enforcement task force laws. I mean, all of these things are targeted towards incarcerating versus decarceration. How do we create preventive programs to empower people? Now, an example, and I'll close with this one. Look at the opioid addiction epidemic in our country. We have more rehabilitation, more laws are now being written to address that. Why? Because you have more Caucasian, more whites are doing what? They're being accused of this particular drug. When crack cocaine came in the early 80s and 90s and was ravishing the Black community, we didn't have no rehabilitation programs. They removed all of the drug treatment programs, all of the mental health programs out of our communities and created prisons.
That's so true. So true. So tell me before I go to this question, let me ask you this. So in talking, you talked about ban the box. Mm-hmm. For those people who are watching who might not know what ban the box is, explain that. The city of Columbia, I'm very proud, and you were instrumental in that. We have banned the box. But I'll be honest, and so after you explain it, I'm gonna give my preaching on that. But I'm be honest, not everybody was supportive of doing it. So explain to everybody what is ban the box.
Well, before I go into ban the box, Tameika, one thing I learned is, and people have to understand, there's 46,000 collateral consequences attached to a felony conviction that a lot of people don't realize. 46,000. You can Google and put collateral consequences, and it's attached to felony conviction. So when a person goes into a courtroom, right, and once that person is convicted, they have collateral consequences, whether state or federal laws that create these barriers for them moving forward. Now we have, especially for Black and brown people, it is even more for us. These 46,000 laws prevent us from employment, housing, education, occupational licensing, from insurance. All it is, so many laws are attached that are so invisible that it impedes a person's movement after incarceration or after he or she walks out of a courtroom. They never thought that once they signed that document and said that they pled guilty, they never thought about all of the collateral consequences came with that felony conviction. And that's like ban the box is just one way to ask companies, employers to remove that question off of the box, because most people, when they check that box, they never get a call back. I've been on computers filling out an application. I check the box, the computer shuts completely off, because they already had it set that we're not even going to consider hiring you. You check that box, the computer shuts down, and you try to open that application again, you don't even go, it's not even going to get processed. So ban the box was, and it's a nationwide thing, a national thing, where we just asking, give people with a felony conviction an opportunity for employment. Don't judge them based upon the conviction that took place when it was 19 years old. We have grown people now in their 40s and 50 years old now returning home that needs a job, because a job is part of the description of being a citizen of this society. Many people use the term returning citizen. If I'm a returning citizen, then part of my returning citizen is restore all my rights back to me. And one of them is employment. I should never have to live my life homeless because I had committed a crime and I served the time and I'm still being punished for it. So that's ban the box, is just opening the door for people to be employed. So again, that they can begin to change their economic structure as well as their home and their communities. When you have people employed, they're less likely to commit crimes. You have this money flowing back into the communities. Now you have families that be able to thrive more because you have money coming in. When you deprive them of money, then you only criminalizing that individual in that community even more.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And so I'll just share for the viewers, just kind of personal. So, even before the city did officially ban the box, we had a policy. We actually had a program that was started under Councilman E.W. Cromartie years ago. And I was co-chair for it, the Workforce Initiative Program, where we actually recruited formerly incarcerated people, mm-hmm. and we trained them in carpentry, electrician, and then helped them get jobs. And then some of them we hired ourselves. Yeah. And it was a successful program until one person who ended up getting hired by the city just got into, made some bad choices. Yeah. And he ended up getting charged. Then, of course, once he got charged, then the paper had to, say, oh, this city employee got charged, and look at his rap sheet, and he was working for the city. And then, all the people who we want to be good citizens. We want to help. We're calling city council members saying, how did y'all hire somebody who had a record, et cetera, et cetera? And then funding happened. And so that program went away. Mm-hmm. So, that's just a perfect example that, and what I challenged you guys before, I said, as we have this conversation, I want you all to be thinking about your personal action items that you could have as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that we as a society, everybody right now, like right now, everybody's in this whole, the reconciliation period about racism, and everybody is thinking about their role in systemic racism. Yeah. Well, you also have to think about your role in preventing people from getting jobs and getting housing. And we've got laws, as Lester talked about, that are collateral laws that are a barrier to mm-hmm. people being coming back into society. And you mentioned you go get an apartment, they ask you about criminal record. You get insurance, they run things. You mentioned, tell us some other things that having a criminal record may prohibit you from being able to have access to or to be able to do as you're transitioning back into society.
We look at something as simple as going to get your license to be a realtor or a home inspector, a barber, a beautician. All of these things you have. I remember I applied when I bought my first house. A home inspector. You familiar with the home inspectors? They come look at your house. I was like, cool. I'm looking for a job. So I was like, man, how did you get? Like, I paid you this money just to walk in my house, check the roof, check the stuff in the house. I'm like, bro, tell me where you going to get this money, because I'm looking for another stream of income. So he told me I went and applied for this home inspection license, become a home inspector. I went through the whole course, passed everything, ready to go take the exam, go to get my state certification. And they told me I wasn't able to do it. They said, Mr. Young, you can't do it. I was like, why? Before I paid my money to the school, I asked him and they told me I was able to do it. He said, you can't do it. You may do it, but we got to you have to do a whole lot more in order for you to get approved. And I was like, for real? So I had to go in front of a council of people to show that I am capable. I'm a different person. I had to explain my crime all over again. And then they said, we'll consider. And they got back with me several months later. And that sometimes take the interest out of you. You like, man, I invested all this money. You tell me no. So that's just one of those things when it comes to with that collateral consequence of occupational licensing. In some states, South Carolina is an exception. There's some states where people are not able to vote. Even after they complete their parole or their probation, they still are not able to vote. Like Florida Amendment 4 was something they advocated for. Here it is, you have completed your sentence, have not gotten into any trouble, and they say, no, you cannot vote. So those are those things that we call the collateral consequences that prevent people from moving forward, even apartments. Like you said, Tameika, I remember when I got out of prison, I was saying my wife and the landlord, she could not add my name to the lease because it would have gotten her evicted. So when the landlords, the people would come, I'm literally sitting in the house, or I have to move, or I have to leave the premises, because if they found out I had a felony conviction, they would have evicted her and may have fined her because I was living in this house. So all of these different things prevent people from moving forward. We tell people to pull themselves up by their own bootstrap, right? When they get out of prison, get a job, get a house. Why y'all people don't have any boots to pull up from? Because the society has placed all of these collateral consequences that prevent them from moving forward and doing what they need to do. And then after that, some of them who get an opportunity, we get criminalized because one person made one bad mistake, right? And now they criminalize the entire group of formerly incarcerated people, saying, that's why we're not going to hire you guys. All of you guys stay out of the job pool. You get these temp jobs with no insurance, no benefits, no nothing. You work, and you don't make any money. And then you wonder why people are living in poverty. You wonder why people are still struggling after incarceration, because the system systematically denies them the mobility to move forward.
That's so true. So tell me, if you had kind of the crystal ball, and you're already working with Path to Redemption and Just Leadership USA, so you're doing the work. What are some of the actionable things that you'd like to see? What are the accomplishments that you want out of the work that you and others are doing to fully restore rights of formerly incarcerated people, and to and make sure that reentry is as smooth as it can be?
I think one is one of the founder of Just Leadership. He has a saying: those who are directly impacted by the problem have the solution, but are further away from the power and the resources. I think that it's important that those who have this lived experience need to be at these tables of discussion. You cannot have a conversation about reentry when you have not been inside of a prison system. It should be someone who had that experience, not someone who graduated with a degree, but someone who have that lived experience need to be at these tables of discussion, because they've been for so long, policies and laws have been written not including the voices of those who've been directly impacted. They never ask you, like, Mr. Young, what did it take for you to survive prison? How could we better accommodate those who are serving longer prison sentences? What do we need to do to better build the process of from prison back into the community? These questions are not being asked, Tameika. Same thing, like even with affordable housing. I appreciate this opportunity here to even be able to sit on that committee and be a voice and say, hey, have y'all thought about these people who have felony convictions? Have you thought about that? Having the voice of people who have been directly impacted by something begins to change laws and help people see the world differently. So my action plan is that for those for those who are formerly incarcerated, you have to begin to use your lived experience and see yourself as an expert, and don't be afraid to speak your truth about the laws and the policies, and build relationships to help others understand that. Two is those who are sitting in power, open the door and allow those who have the experience to have a dialogue with you so that you can better understand what it takes to be a city that is really about second chance. You cannot be about second chance when you have not had a conversation, real conversation with those who have been in that criminal justice system and experienced the dehumanization and the bias and the racism and all of that stuff that comes with that system.
Right. Okay, before I lose this, Beverly wants to know, tell us about your book again. So where can people get the 5 stages of incarceration?
Thank you, Ms. Beverly. You can go to Path and number 2 Redemption. To make you put that Path to Redemption .org, and you can see some of the work that I've been doing, as well as Path to Redemption. We also mentor young boys and helping them make better choices that don't lead to incarceration, because that was another thing that I saw inside of prison. Is so many people walking inside that prison system, 17 years old with a life sentence. It used to break my heart because I knew what I done went through all of the time, the years that I've been in prison, and you 17 years old and you won't see life again until 2050. You know, that's like, it was heartbreaking for me. So, so you get a chance to see some of that stuff that I've done with working with the youth. But my book is, Tameika, it's a personal healing. It's about helping people heal inside of prison, because a lot of us are broken. A lot of the men and women inside of prison are broken because of just the trauma that they experience of inside of their houses and their communities. These people are broken. So when we talk about how do we correct that criminal justice system, I think that my book is one of those books that help you understand that in order for one to be rehabilitated, there has to be a personal healing. And you have to be able to build a relationship with these men and women inside of prison to help them revisit that trauma that led to them living a life of just hopelessness. So that's what really my book's about. And you get a chance to read it and we can have a dialogue about it. But we have to heal. People have to heal. As I said, hurt people, but heal people. And that's where I got it in my life. When I was beginning that healing process, God told me to share this message and help other men and women who are dealing with the same things I'm dealing with, help them heal. And that's what the 5 stages of incarceration is about.
Great. So Miss Beverly has one more question. So this will be our last question tonight. She said, how do you keep the voices from getting tangled into politics?
Good. My voice?
I think she said voices. So you mentioned about formerly incarcerated people. You were saying don't let people make sure your voice is heard, make sure you use your voice. Mm-hmm. So I guess she's asking in general, how do we keep those voices from not being tangled into politics? I guess I'll share, Beverly, and then Lester can answer the question. I would say from my standpoint is, yes, you have some elected officials who may not listen, but you have a lot of us who will. I think it's really about personal relationships and understanding the problem. The thing about it is, I tell people this all the time. First of all, not every elected official should be an elected official.
Agreed.
But those of us who are, we're not an expert at everything. And mm-hmm. So there are, like Lester talked about, there's lived experiences, there's education, there's knowledge about different things that you don't have a clue. There are so many things. And that's why I wanted to do this talk tonight, is because when I met Lester and he shared with me just that Popeye story, mm-hmm. continued to resonate in my mind, because those are things that I had never thought about. It's not anything that most people I know think about, that's a barrier to reentry. And so the way you keep voices from being tangled into politics is exactly what he said, making sure that people don't silence your voice, but reach out and be that expert. He talked about being the expert. Mm-hmm. Be that expert to the folks who are in positions of power to make change because they don't know, and they will welcome people who have that experience and that education to educate them so that they can be a better elected official.
I agree with you. And like I said, Mayor Benjamin was one of those individuals. I remember speaking with him in the airport in North Carolina. We was on the same airplane, and I was like, I need to speak to the mayor about this issue. And he was open. I knew that I couldn't approach the mayor or any elected officials with the rah, because that's not how people don't receive a message with just you coming and you screaming down their necks about what your political views were. So I realize now that, like, building relationships as formerly incarcerated people, I think that we can build relationship with elected officials to have these type of dialogues. We can be able to change a lot of policy. And that's what I learned from Mayor Benjamin, is that he was open to listen. Here it is. We were both in the airport. We had about 20 minutes before our next flight or whatever to move forward. But me and Mayor Benjamin, we walked and talked in the airport about the impact of banning the box, why he needed to expand it, what could he do to change and include Black and brown people in Colombia into the job pool. And he saw it. And it was about that relationship. And then from there, we met you, we met other councilmen and with the city, and we began to build that relationship. And they understood that we were coming from a different lens, that they needed to listen, and they listened and they got it. And that's how I go throughout the state of South Carolina, build relationships and help people understand that you're not just serving one person, you're saving generations of people when you open that door for employment, because that man has a child, has a wife, has people that are connected to. So when that extra money flows into that household, that creates better situation for that entire family. And that could prevent that father or that mother from their sons repeating the same cycle of the father who just walked out of prison or the mother who just walked out of prison. By employing them, you help change family structure.
That's an excellent point to end on, because it really is about that whole family structure. And there's so many things that our systems have done to break down the family and to keep people from coming up. And so what we want to do is educate and empower and let us all, do what we can within our own sphere of influence to affect these changes that we want to see. So I am honored to know you. I thank you so much. And as Beverly said, you might go to preach, but I tell you, you don't have to be ordained to actually speak a word. And you spoke a word tonight, my brother. So thank you so much.
Appreciate you. Tell your husband I said hello, and thank you all for the invites all of the times of meeting people. I appreciate you not judging me for the person I used to be, but seeing the person that I am. And I really appreciate that. We can go back again to relationships. You saw me as a person, just like we advocate that I am human. I am human. You saw me as a human. You didn't never judge me from day one. You invited me into your home to listen to other presidential candidates. That meant a lot to me, as a person, and it add more value and depth to what I'm striving to do. And I just appreciate you, and may you and your husband and your mother-in-law, everyone continue to do great things. And I thank you for that invite, Tameika.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, Lester. And those of you watching, thank you for tuning in to another community conversation. Like I mentioned, share this so more people can hear Lester's story and what he's doing. Go to pathtoredemption.org and get the book, educate yourself, read some of his readings, and just share this message, because I think we all we can see definitely from the last 2 weeks, we all have a voice. And if more of us are advocating for the change we want to see, then those changes will be made. And so I really thank you guys for listening. And then just a little plug for my next community conversation. I'm super excited. I'm excited for every single community.
Who do you have?
I have former Massachusetts Governor Devine Patrick has agreed to be my guest on Monday night. Devine has a unique perspective, since he is, former governor. He was a civil rights attorney in the U.S. Department of Justice, and he has a very interesting perspective about the changes that we need to see in the criminal justice system. So I'm excited for him to share with you guys. So that'll be Monday at 7:00. So we won't do 8:00. We'll do Monday at 7:00. Hope you guys like this evening time, because now that people are back to work, I figured let's do the evening so we can have some live, but you can always watch the replay. But until then, Ellen Clary says, great. She says, thank you, Mr. Young. Beverly says, message delivery and building relationships, an aha moment. So we're glad you guys got something for this. So anyway, I am Councilwoman Tameika Isaac Devine. Until next time, thank you so much for joining me for Community Conversations. And for more community conversations, just always check out my Facebook page or my YouTube page. And we're going to bring you some more great conversations, not only to educate you, but also to challenge you to take action in your communities. So until next time, see you later. Good night and God bless.
Be blessed.
All right.